On my grandson's birthday, my daughter-in-law leaned across the table. "You're not invited on our family trip. We don't need you." Even my son stayed silent while she smirked. I just smiled, though I'd already gathered proof of her affair and stolen money. When the plane turned back and the truth exploded, she lost everything. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The morning sun filtered through my kitchen window, warming the scent of fresh coffee and toasted bread. For a brief moment, everything felt ordinary, until Vanessa Carter's voice sliced through the calm like glass shattering on tile. "We decided you're not coming. My mom will take your place." She spoke with an authority that was never hers to claim, sipping casually from my favorite mug as though she owned the room. My son Daniel shifted uncomfortably behind her, his silence once again a shield for her cruelty. And my grandson Ethan lowered his gaze to the floor, shame coloring his young cheeks. "I don't want to babysit an old lady during my vacation," Vanessa continued, her smile thin, her tone sharpened to wound. The words landed like a slap, but I kept my face perfectly composed. At 68, I had endured worse storms than her petty insults. Calm was my armor, silence my weapon. "Have a wonderful trip," I said simply, turning back to my toast. My voice betrayed nothing, though my heart pulsed with quiet resolve. Ethan's eyes flicked up, wide with unspoken apology. My sweet boy, caught in a web woven by a woman who wore masks thinner than paper. Vanessa leaned her hip against the counter, savoring her small triumph. "The resort has a spa, Margaret," she said with mock sweetness. "You wouldn't enjoy all the walking anyway. My mother adores Caribbean cruises." Her implication was clear. 68 equaled decrepit in her world. Never mind the 3 marathons I had run in my 50s, or the fact that I could still outpace most women half my age. To her, I was a burden, an obstacle to the glossy image of perfection she cultivated. Daniel finally spoke, though his words were hardly a defense. "Mom, maybe next time we'll plan something more suitable for you." As though I hadn't raised him alone after his father died, working double shifts to put him through architecture school. As though I hadn't been the one who kept Ethan every weekend while they attended their lavish parties. My sacrifices, my loyalty, all erased with a single cowardly concession. "Of course, dear," I replied, my voice steady, masking the storm within. "I have plenty to keep me busy here." Vanessa smirked, convinced of her victory. She had no idea she had just gifted me the moment I had been waiting for. 40 years as a trauma nurse had taught me how to read people, how to see through the cracks in their masks. And Vanessa's mask? It was crumbling, hole by hole, lie by lie. When they left to pack, the kitchen fell silent again. I moved through the quiet house, each step deliberate, until I reached the drawer in my bedroom. Beneath faded photo albums lay a manila envelope. My hands hovered for a moment before I pulled it free, feeling the weight of months of preparation settle into my palms. Inside were phone records, bank statements, photographs, evidence of secrets Vanessa believed were safe in the dark. But she had grown sloppy. 3 months ago, her client meetings had stretched along past midnight, her alibis as flimsy as tissue paper. When she suddenly began volunteering to pick Ethan up from school, a task she had never cared to do before, I knew something far darker lurked beneath her performance. I did what any mother, any grandmother, protecting her family would do. I reached out to an old friend from my nursing days, Detective Miller, who pointed me toward a reliable private investigator. Within weeks, the file began to grow. Photographs of Vanessa in Victor Lane's car, lips pressed to his like promises of betrayal, bank statements that revealed stolen funds funneled into luxury, phone records mapping a trail of deception. Every page was proof, every photograph a nail in the coffin of her lies. The next morning, I drove downtown to see my attorney, Harold Grant. He had been by my side for 15 years, since the day Harold, my late husband, passed. Harold Grant was not just a lawyer. He was one of the few people who understood why I suddenly wanted to rewrite my future. "Margaret, are you absolutely certain about this?" he asked, eyes scanning the documents spread across his desk. His voice was steady, but the weight of his words lingered in the air. "These are significant changes. Completely certain, I replied, my pen steady as I signed my name. I've had 3 weeks to consider this. Frankly, that's 3 weeks too many. The first document transferred the deed of my home into a trust for Ethan, ensuring Vanessa would never lay claim to its walls. The second erased her name from my life insurance policy, eradicating the entitlement she assumed was hers. And the third, my favorite, created a college fund for Ethan from an account she didn't even know existed. For all her hunger for wealth, Vanessa had never once bothered to ask about my finances. She wanted my money, but never the story of how I earned it. Harold handed me a thick folder, copies of every legal document, along with the damning photographs and records. I traced my fingers over the edges of the envelope, knowing what it meant. Her downfall was no longer a matter of if, but when. That evening, I prepared dinner for one in the silence of my kitchen. Outside, twilight stretched across the neighborhood, calm and unknowing. Inside, I imagined the look on Vanessa's face when her carefully constructed world began to crack. She thought she had humiliated me, cast me aside like an afterthought. What she had done, without realizing it, was deliver me the perfect opportunity to reclaim my place, not as a burden, but as the anchor of this family. As I folded the napkin across my lap, I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. The game had shifted, and this time I would not play to lose. Morning light spilled across Harold Grant's polished mahogany desk, glinting off the brass lamp that had stood in the same spot since the day I first stepped into his office. For 15 years, this man had been my guide through legal storms, the steady hand I trusted since losing my husband. And today, with the manila envelope heavy in my purse, I knew I was about to change the course of my family's future. Margaret, Harold began, adjusting his glasses as he studied the pages spread before him. Are you absolutely sure about this? These revisions are not small matters. I am, I replied, voice firm, hands steady as they rested against the desk. I've spent weeks thinking about it. That's already too long. His eyes flicked to me, searching for hesitation. He would find none. I had lived 68 years, raised a son alone, and endured grief that could have hollowed me out. But I was not hollow. I was steel. The first paper slid toward me, and with it was the life I was about to rewrite. My signature flowed onto the page with deliberate care, sealing the transfer of my house into a trust for Ethan. That old two-story home worth nearly $400,000 would now belong to the boy who still looked at me with pure love. Not Vanessa, never Vanessa. The second document followed, this one colder in its finality. Vanessa's name erased from my life insurance policy. She had built her castle on the sand of expectation, certain she would inherit what was mine. One stroke of a pen, and the ground beneath her began to crumble. The third carried with it the sweetest satisfaction. I established a college fund for Ethan from savings she never suspected existed. Vanessa had never once asked about my finances, never bothered to wonder how a retired nurse kept her independence so comfortably. She wanted the reward, but never the story of sacrifice that built it. That ignorance was her undoing. When I leaned back, Harold's voice was low but steady. Perfect timing, he murmured. Exactly, I corrected softly, a fire in my chest. She won't see it coming. Harold gathered the papers into a thick envelope, the edges pressing sharply against his fingers. This is everything, he said, sliding it toward me. The deeds, the insurance revisions, the trust fund documents, and the photographs from your investigator. I drew the envelope close, the weight of it both sobering and liberating. Inside were the truths Vanessa believed she had buried under charm and manipulation. Photographs of her entwined with Victor Lane in his gleaming BMW, their hands tangled, their lips sealed in betrayal. Bank records mapping the theft from client trust funds, money siphoned away to fuel her luxury. Phone logs tracing late-night calls, the trail of lies she spun like a spider web. The evidence of financial misconduct is solid, Harold said quietly. The state bar will have no choice but to investigate. And if the authorities pursue this, that will be Daniel's choice, I interrupted, though we both knew how it would end. My part is only to make sure my son knows the truth of the woman he married. For a moment, silence hung between us, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Then Harold leaned back, studying me with something almost like admiration. You've thought of everything. I smiled faintly. I've had a lifetime to practice. By the time I left his office, the afternoon sun was sinking, casting long shadows across the pavement. Yet inside, I felt lighter than I had in months. The chains of waiting, of watching in silence, had fallen away. Each step back to my car echoed with resolve. That night, I prepared dinner in my quiet kitchen, the same space Vanessa had invaded with her smug cruelty just the day before. I set the table for one, poured myself a glass of red wine, and let the silence settle like a friend. As I chewed slowly, I thought of the morning to come, the international terminal, buzzing with families and suitcases and laughter. Daniel and Ethan, faces alight with the anticipation of a trip they believed was theirs to enjoy. And Vanessa, strutting in her designer clothes, her smile sharp enough to cut glass, convinced she had won. She would not see me waiting. She would not suspect the folder in my hand, and she would not imagine that her reign of manipulation was about to crumble in public before the very people she sought to impress. I folded my napkin, lifted my glass, and whispered into the stillness of my kitchen. Tomorrow the truth comes out. Across town, Vanessa was likely packing her dresses, rehearsing her victory. She had no idea that the trip she thought would secure her triumph would become the stage for her undoing. And me, I would be there dressed in dignity, armed not with bitterness, but with proof. Because sometimes justice is not loud, not violent. Sometimes it is quiet, deliberate, and patient. Sometimes justice looks like a grandmother carrying an envelope that could destroy everything built on lies. The navy dress with pearl buttons slid over my shoulders like armor, familiar and dignified. Harold used to tell me it made me look distinguished. And if I was going to end Vanessa Carter's reign of manipulation, I would do it looking every inch the woman she had underestimated. I pinned my hair neatly, slipped on my small pearl bow earrings, and stared at the reflection in the mirror. No bitterness, no hesitation, only resolve. The manila envelope rested on the entry table as I passed by, heavy with the truth she thought would stay hidden. I picked it up, feeling its edges bite into my palm, and walked out into the cool morning. The sky was blushing pink with sunrise, the kind of day that promised new beginnings. At the airport, the international terminal buzzed with chatter, rolling suitcases, and children tugging at parents' sleeves. The air was thick with the perfume of excitement and fresh coffee. But beneath it all, I carried my own quiet storm. I spotted them almost immediately, Daniel, Ethan, and Vanessa, standing at the check-in counter. Daniel's face, for once, looked genuinely joyful, softened by the anticipation of a break from his grueling work. Ethan bounced on his heels, his small hands gripping the handle of his backpack. And Vanessa, oh Vanessa, stood with her designer luggage perfectly arranged, chin high, surveying her surroundings as though she were royalty among peasants. "Grandma!" Ethan's voice rang out when he saw me. He bolted from their side and threw his arms around my waist. I bent to kiss his forehead, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, clinging to his warmth. "I wish you were coming with us," he whispered. "Oh, sweetheart," I said softly, pressing a small package into his hands. "Grandma has important things to do here, but I brought you something." His eyes lit up as he tore open the wrapping to reveal a leather travel journal. "Promise me you'll write about all your adventures." "I will," he said quickly, hugging it to his chest. By then, Vanessa had approached, her smile polished but hollow. "How sweet of you to see us off, Margaret. Though really, you didn't need to come all this way." "Oh, but I did," I answered smoothly, standing tall. "I have something very important for Daniel." Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, suspicion threading through the edges of her mask. I slipped the envelope from my purse and handed it to my son. "Don't open this until after takeoff, honey," I said, keeping my tone light. "It's sensitive family business that shouldn't wait until you get back." Daniel frowned, confusion furrowing his brow. "Mom, what is this about?" "Just some documents that need your attention. Nothing urgent, but important." Vanessa's gaze sharpened, though her smile remained fixed. She was always wary of my kindness, as if she couldn't fathom generosity without a hidden agenda. Perhaps because her own life was one long agenda. She checked her watch, her voice crisp. "We should get through security. First-class boarding starts soon." Of course it did. For Vanessa, mingling with the rest of humanity was unthinkable. I hugged Ethan again, then Daniel, my arms holding longer than usual, as if the truth I was delivering needed an anchor. When Vanessa leaned in for our awkward air kiss, I tilted just enough for her to hear me whisper, low and clear, "Enjoy your last family vacation." Her body went rigid, the color draining from her face. I stepped back, smiling brightly as though nothing had been said, and waved. "Have a wonderful trip," I called over my shoulder, my heels clicking against the polished floor as I walked away. Each step grew lighter until I nearly floated through the terminal, the envelope no longer mine to carry. The moment I had prepared for months was finally in motion. By the time I reached my car, I was almost giddy. At 68, I was learning the art of a well-timed dramatic exit. Vanessa believed she had stripped me of dignity, banished me to the sidelines of my own family. What she had done without realizing it was hand me the stage. The drive home blurred with anticipation. I pictured the scene unfolding somewhere above the ocean, Daniel opening the envelope with his steady hands, his eyes scanning the photographs, the bank records, the betrayal spelled out in ink. Vanessa's mask cracking, her voice rising, her grip on controls slipping through her manicured fingers. I parked in my driveway and stepped into the quiet of my home, the silence now humming with energy. In the garden, roses bent gently under the morning breeze, their petals catching the light. I trimmed one with deliberate care, my phone tucked nearby. Soon I knew it would ring, and when it did, everything would change. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits patiently, dressed in pearls and navy blue, armed with nothing more than truth. So if you're listening now, don't look away. What happens next is the moment everything unravels. And believe me, you'll want to hear every word. Stay with me, like, share, and subscribe, because this story is only beginning. The plane lifted from the runway with a roar, the Caribbean stretching ahead like a promise of paradise. Daniel leaned back against the seat, exhaustion softened by the hum of the engines, Ethan's laughter filling the row. For a brief moment, it almost felt like peace. But the manila envelope resting on his lap was a weight heavier than any suitcase. He turned it over slowly, fingers brushing the flap. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Don't open this until after takeoff." Margaret never dramatized. If she said it mattered, it mattered. Vanessa glanced sideways, her smile tight. "Really, Daniel, it can wait. We're on vacation." But something in her voice made his chest tighten. He broke the seal. Inside lay a stack of documents, photographs, bank statements. His breath caught as he shuffled through them, each page stripping away the lies he hadn't wanted to see. Photographs of Vanessa pressed against Victor Lane, their bodies entwined in shadows of betrayal. Bank statements detailing missing funds, hundreds of thousands siphoned from client accounts. Phone records stretching into the night, proof of secrets whispered when she claimed to be working late. Daniel's throat burned. "My God," he whispered. Vanessa stiffened. "You shouldn't be looking at that here." His hands shook as he flipped to another page. The evidence was clear, damning in its precision. His wife had not only betrayed their marriage, but jeopardized her career, their reputation, their very lives. "What is this, Vanessa?" His voice trembled, low but cutting. "Lies," she hissed quickly, leaning closer, her nails biting into his arm. "Your mother is trying to destroy us. She's hated me from the start." "Photographs don't lie." He shoved one into her lap. The image of her kissing Victor in his car stared back at them both, undeniable. Ethan, sensing the tension, grew quiet, clutching his travel journal against his chest. His wide eyes darted between his parents, confusion clouding his joy. "I can explain," Vanessa whispered, her face pale. Daniel's voice broke. "Explain how you stole from your clients? Explain how you risked my career, my family's name?" She flinched, pulling the photo away from Ethan's view. "Keep your voice down," she snapped. But there was no fire in her tone, only desperation. Daniel pressed his forehead into his hands, the plane swaying gently as if mocking his collapse. He felt the world shift beneath him, the groundless sensation of betrayal wrapping tighter than the cabin air. He reached for his phone, his fingers numb, and dialed his mother. Margaret answered on the second ring, her voice calm, steady, as if she had been waiting. "How was takeoff, dear?" "Don't," Daniel rasped, tears burning behind his eyes. "Don't pretend this is normal. You knew. You've known for months." "I knew she was unraveling," Margaret replied gently. "But the choices were hers, Daniel, not mine." He bit down on his lip, staring at the evidence spread across his lap. The bank statements. Mom, she stole nearly $200,000. She could go to prison. Yes, Margaret said simply. She could. In the background, Ethan's voice piped up, frightened. Dad, what's happening? Why is Mom crying? Daniel looked at his son, his chest caving. Nothing you need to worry about, buddy, he said softly, though the words felt like ash on his tongue. Vanessa fled to the bathroom, slamming the door behind her, leaving Daniel trembling in his seat. Passengers cast curious glances, but he ignored them, his entire world narrowed to the papers in his hands and the voice of his mother in his ear. She says you planned this, he muttered into the phone. She says you're trying to ruin our marriage. Margaret's voice carried a quiet strength. Did I take those photographs? Did I force her to steal? Did I arrange her affair? Daniel said nothing because there was nothing to say. Silence filled the line, but it was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. She did this to herself, Margaret continued. I only made sure you knew the truth before it destroyed you completely. His chest heaved, tears finally breaking free. We're turning around, he whispered. The captain said we could return to Miami for a family emergency. Through the thin bathroom door, Vanessa's muffled voice rose in sharp panic. Don't you dare! This is manipulation, Daniel. She's poisoning you against me. Her words rang hollow now. Lies once gilded with charm sounded brittle, cracking under the weight of proof. Daniel clutched the phone tighter, his voice breaking. Mom, thank you. I should have protected you years ago. I let her treat you like nothing. And You're my son, Margaret interrupted softly. You don't need to apologize for loving the wrong person. What matters now is that you love your son enough to protect him. He looked at Ethan, who had curled against his side, journal clutched in small hands, eyes shimmering with confusion. Daniel wrapped an arm around him, whispering promises he wasn't sure how to keep. The engines hummed, the plane turning back toward Miami. The Caribbean was no longer ahead. What waited was confrontation, unraveling, the storm of truth finally breaking. Margaret's voice, calm as the ocean before dawn, lingered in his ear. I'll be here when you land. And for the first time in years, Daniel believed her. The tires crunched over gravel as Daniel's car rolled into my driveway, headlights cutting through the dusk. I stood by the window, the garden behind me drenched in the fading gold of sunset. My pulse was steady, but my chest tightened with the weight of what I knew was coming. Tonight, everything would shatter. The car idled for long minutes, shadows shifting inside as voices rose and fell. Finally, the back door flew open, and Ethan tumbled out, his face streaked with tears. He ran to me with a sob that tore at my heart. Grandma, why did we come back? Mom and Dad are fighting and nobody will tell me why. I gathered him close, the way I had when he was a toddler with scraped knees. Come inside, sweetheart, I whispered. Let's find you some cookies while your parents sort things out. His small body trembled in my arms, but he nodded, trusting me as he always had. The front door opened again and Daniel appeared. His face was gray with exhaustion, his eyes red-rimmed, his proud posture bent beneath the weight of betrayal. She's in the car, he said hoarsely, calling every lawyer she knows. She actually suggested we could fix this if I just ignored the evidence. I told her I've already contacted a divorce attorney. Before I could answer, Vanessa stormed up the walkway. The mask was gone, her perfect hair tangled, makeup streaked, designer clothes wrinkled from the flight. What stood before me was no longer the polished attorney who had sneered at me in my kitchen. She was raw, feral, and unhinged. You vindictive old witch, she screamed, her voice echoing down the quiet street. How dare you destroy my family? My family? I stepped outside, the evening air cool against my skin. I was 24 years older, but in that moment I towered over her. Ethan is my grandson. Daniel is my son. You're just someone who married into this family and forgot what respect means. Her hands shook as she jabbed a finger toward me. I'll call the police. This is harassment, stalking. You'll regret ever crossing me. Please do, I said calmly. And when you speak to Detective Miller, tell him Margaret Hayes sent you. He and I have become quite friendly. Daniel's hand gripped her shoulder, his patience frayed. Vanessa, stop. You're only making this worse. She spun toward him, desperation spilling from every word. Worse? She hired someone to follow me. She's trying to destroy us. No, Daniel snapped, his voice rising with a fury I hadn't heard in years. You destroyed us. You stole money from your clients, people who trusted you. You betrayed me, our son, everything we built. It was borrowing, she cried, her voice breaking. I was going to pay it back. With what? Victor Lane's money? The name slipped from Daniel's lips like poison. Vanessa staggered, her face draining of color as though he had struck her. How long? His voice trembled. How long have you been lying to me? Her lips parted, but no words came. Silence was her only answer, and it screamed louder than any confession. Take Ethan inside, Mom, Daniel said quietly, his shoulders sagging with defeat. This conversation is over. I led my grandson into the kitchen, the sound of their voices trailing behind us, sharp and desperate. Vanessa's tone climbed higher, brittle with panic. You can't take my son away from me. I'm his mother. Daniel's reply cut through the night. You should have thought about that before you became a criminal. From the window above the sink, I watched as he loaded Ethan's suitcase into his car. Vanessa stood in the driveway screaming threats, her shrill cries echoing off the houses of neighbors peeking through their blinds. She looked small against the fading light, a woman cornered by the consequences she had created. Inside, Ethan sat at the table, his small hands cradling a cookie untouched. His eyes were wide, his shoulders stiff. Grandma, he whispered, are they getting divorced? I smoothed his hair, my heart aching. Sweetheart, whatever happens, you'll always have your father, and you'll always have me. His lip trembled, but he nodded, as if clinging to the promise was enough to steady him. Outside, Vanessa's cries grew fainter, as Daniel finally turned away from her and came back to us. He looked 10 years older, the lines of pain etched deep into his face, but there was clarity in his eyes. The collapse had begun, and there was no turning back. And to those of you listening, if you were standing where Daniel stood, holding the truth in one hand and betrayal in the other, would you forgive or would you walk away? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you would choose. The house was quiet again, though not with the comfort of peace. It was the silence of exhaustion, of a word spoken too sharply and truths too raw to soften. Daniel sat at my kitchen table with his phone face down, his fingers pressed against his forehead. Ethan leaned against me on the couch, his head heavy on my shoulder, the sweet smell of his hair reminding me that innocence still lingered somewhere in this house, despite everything. For 3 nights, Daniel and Ethan slept in the spare rooms. Their suitcases sat half unpacked in the hallway, as though they weren't sure if they belonged here or were only temporary guests. Yet every morning, Ethan padded into the kitchen in his pajamas and asked for pancakes, and every morning I made them, stacking them high and drowning them in maple syrup. Daniel tried to keep up a front for his son, but when Ethan wasn't looking, I saw his hands trembling as he scrolled through his messages. Vanessa's name filled the screen, 30, 40, sometimes 50 missed calls. Texts alternating between pleading apologies and threats, each more frantic than the last. She's unraveling, he said one night, voice low as though admitting it aloud gave it more power. Every call is either please forgive me or you'll regret this. I don't even know who she is anymore. You know exactly who she is, I told him gently. You just didn't want to believe it. It was the following morning when the news broke. I was flipping pancakes as the television hummed in the background. The anchor's voice was crisp, emotionless. Prominent family law attorney Vanessa Carter was arrested last night on charges of embezzlement and fraud. The State Bar Association has launched a formal investigation. The camera flashed her mugshot onto the screen, hair tangled, eyes hollow, makeup streaked. Gone was the polished woman who once strutted through my kitchen as though it belonged to her. In her place was someone unmasked, stripped bare by her own arrogance. Daniel froze with his coffee halfway to his lips. The mug shook before he set it down, his jaw tightening as though he were swallowing shards of glass. Dad? Ethan asked softly, his fork suspended above his plate. Why is Mom on the news? Daniel swallowed hard, then reached for his son's hand. Your mom made some very bad choices, buddy. Choices that hurt a lot of people. Now she has to face the consequences. Alarmed Ethan's brow furrowed, but he nodded, pushing a piece of pancake through syrup without eating it. Childhood should have been too tender a place for words like fraud and arrest. Yet here he was, staring down a truth bigger than him. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Eat up, sweetheart," I said softly. "Today's a new day." But as I watched him chew slowly, I knew no breakfast, no matter how sweet, could shield him from the reality of what his mother had done. Later that afternoon, Daniel and I sat on the porch while Ethan played in the yard with a baseball and glove. The autumn air carried the scent of cut grass and wood smoke, ordinary smells in a world that felt anything but ordinary. "I should have seen it sooner," Daniel muttered, his eyes fixed on the distance. "The late nights, the money that didn't add up, the way she snapped at you." I kept telling myself it was stress, that she was under pressure at work. But she was stealing, lying, cheating. And God help me, I defended her. "You wanted to believe the woman you married," I said, "and there's no shame in that. Hope makes fools of us all sometimes." "But at your expense," he whispered. "I let her humiliate you, tear into you, and I stood there like a coward. What kind of son does that make me?" "The kind who still came home," I replied firmly. "The kind who protects his child when it matters most. Don't confuse endurance with cowardice." His eyes filled, but he said nothing, only nodding. When the sun began to set, Ethan ran up the porch steps and dropped the ball into Daniel's lap. "Dad, play catch with me." Daniel forced a smile and stood, following his son into the yard. I watched them from my chair, the thud of the ball against leather filling the air, laughter breaking through the weight that had settled around us. For a while, they looked like themselves again, father and son, simple and unburdened. Yet I knew better. Vanessa's arrest was only the beginning. The courtroom battles, the custody fights, the scars etched into a child's heart, those storms were still coming. Justice had been served, yes, but justice often arrives tangled with grief. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked at me with eyes too old for his 12 years. "Grandma," he whispered, "are you glad she got arrested?" The question hit me squarely. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "I'm glad the truth came out," I said carefully. "I'm glad your dad knows who he was really married to, and I'm glad you're safe. But glad she's in trouble? No, sweetheart. I take no joy in seeing anyone fall apart, even someone who hurt me." His small hand slipped into mine, warm and trusting. "I just want things to be normal again." I kissed his brow. "So do I." But normal was gone. What remained was survival and the determination to build something honest on the ruins Vanessa had left behind. The doorbell rang just after sunrise, sharp and insistent, cutting through the stillness of my house. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find two figures waiting. Detective Miller stood on my porch, his broad shoulders framed against the morning light. Beside him was a woman I didn't know, Detective Chang, her dark eyes calm but probing, a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. "Mrs. Hayes," Miller said with a polite nod. "May we come in?" The air shifted in my chest. I stepped aside. "Of course, Ramon." We settled in the living room and the weight of their presence heavy against the quiet walls. And Detective Chang was the first to speak. "We need to ask you some questions about Vanessa Carter." Her name in that tone, clinical, detached, sent a chill through me. "What do you need to know?" "When did you first suspect financial misconduct?" Chang asked, flipping open her folder. "When her spending stopped matching their income," I answered steadily. "Designer handbags, jewelry, weekly spa treatments. Even with Daniel's salary, the math didn't add up." "So you hired an investigator?" "I hired someone to protect my family," I said firmly, "to know if my son and grandson were in danger." The detectives exchanged a glance. Chang leaned forward. "Mrs. Hayes, some might call your methods unorthodox." I met her eyes without flinching. "Detective, Vanessa was stealing from vulnerable clients while planning to take my grandson. Tell me, what part of protecting family is unorthodox?" Miller cleared his throat, shifting the conversation. "Mrs. Hayes, were you aware of Vanessa's travel plans?" The question stopped me cold. Wait, travel plans? Chang slid a document across the coffee table. Airline tickets, 2 seats, purchased a week before the Caribbean trip. 1 adult, 1 child. Destination, a country with no extradition treaty. One way. The room tilted, my breath caught in my throat. She was planning to take Ethan? It appears so, Chang confirmed softly. If you hadn't intervened, she might have left the country with him within days. The words struck like a knife, my sweet grandson, ripped away by the woman who had mocked me in my own kitchen. She hadn't just wanted to humiliate me. She had wanted to erase me from his life forever. That evening, I told Daniel. He sank into his father's old recliner, his face gray, his hands pressed against his eyes as if to block out the truth. She was going to take him, he whispered. She was going to steal my son and disappear. I touched his shoulder, steadying him. It seems that way. His voice cracked, hollow with regret. If you hadn't figured it out, if you hadn't stopped her, I would have lost him. My God, Mom, I almost lost my son forever because I was too blind to see who she really was. You're not blind, Daniel, I said gently. You're a good man who wanted to believe the best about someone you loved. That isn't blindness, that's hope. Hope nearly destroyed me, he muttered, broken. Before I could answer, Ethan wandered into the room with his math homework, his small voice breaking the silence. Dad, can you help me with this problem? Daniel wiped his eyes quickly and pulled him onto his lap. Of course, buddy. Show me what you're working on. I watched them, father and son bent over fractions, as my chest tightened with a painful mix of relief and sorrow. We were safe, yes, but safety carried a cost. Ethan would grow up knowing his mother hadn't just broken the law, she had nearly kidnapped him. Daniel would live with the guilt of almost losing everything. Weeks later, the courthouse was packed. Reporters buzzing as Vanessa sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her arrogance stripped away. When the judge asked for statements, Daniel rose. His voice shook, but his words cut like steel. She didn't just steal money, he said. She stole years of my life, manipulated my mother, and almost cost me my relationship with my son. She planned to kidnap Ethan. The damage may never fully heal. Vanessa's lawyer begged for leniency. The judge listened, then delivered the sentence. 3 years in prison, parole possible after 18 months. The gavel fell. Vanessa's shoulders slumped. And for the first time, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, but sadness, because justice always leaves scars. And to you listening now, do you believe some people can truly change? Or are there some sins that can never be undone? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you believe. The courthouse steps echoed beneath our feet as we walked out into the sharp autumn air. A reporter swarmed, their voices a blur of questions I refused to answer. Daniel's arm was wrapped protectively around Ethan, guiding him past the flashing cameras. The sentence had been handed down, the gavel striking like thunder in a storm we'd long seen approaching. 3 years in prison. Vanessa Carter was led away in chains, her eyes hollow, her face lined with the weight of choices that had finally caught her. I should have felt victorious. Instead, a strange emptiness lingered. Justice had been served? Yes, but victory had a bitter taste when it came at the expense of family. Ethan clutched my hand as we crossed the parking lot, his grip strong and steady. He was only 12, but his eyes carried knowledge too heavy for his years. Life shifted in the months that followed. Daniel moved permanently into my home, transforming the old sewing room into his office. Ethan's laughter began to return, softer at first, then brighter, until the house no longer felt like a shelter for broken souls, but a place where healing could take root. Still, shadows remained. Daniel wrestled with guilt, replaying every moment he had let Vanessa's cruelty slide. Ethan sometimes woke in the night, crying out for answers no child should ever need. It was during one of those quieter afternoons, when the garden smelled of roses and damp earth, that Robert Collins entered our lives. I was bent over the flower beds, pruning shears in hand, when a tall man with silver hair walked up my driveway carrying a small bouquet of wild flowers. Mrs. Hayes, he said warmly, I'm Robert Collins. I live a few houses down, the blue one with the white shutters. I straightened, brushing soil from my gloves. Of course, the retired judge. I've heard you moved in last spring. He smiled, his eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. That's me. I was wondering if you'd join me for coffee sometime. I'll warn you now, I make dreadful coffee. But Margaret Brooks tells me you make excellent conversation. I laughed, surprised by his directness. Margaret's been talking about me, has she? Only good things, he replied. She said you're someone who stands up for her family. After 30 years on the bench, I can tell you, strength like that isn't easy to find. I studied him, searching for the hidden barbs I had grown accustomed to in others, but found none. His presence was calm, steady, like a tide that didn't demand attention, but quietly shaped everything around it. I make coffee every morning at 8, I said finally. You're welcome to join me tomorrow, but fair warning, my life hasn't exactly been quiet lately. I'll take my chances, he said with a smile that reached his eyes. From that day forward, Robert became a fixture at my breakfast table. He listened more than he spoke, never once judging when I told him about Vanessa, the trial, the near kidnapping. You protected your family, he said simply. That's what mothers do. Some people confuse justice with revenge. You chose justice. He was widowed, his wife taken by cancer years before. Grief gave him a gentleness I understood, an empathy that didn't try to fix pain but sat quietly beside it. Ethan adored him almost instantly, especially when Robert mentioned his decades of coaching Little League baseball. Daniel, cautious at first, eventually grew to respect the man who treated me not as fragile but as equal. Evenings on the porch became our ritual. Robert and I sat side by side, watching Ethan throw pitches in the yard, the glow of the setting sun painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we sat in silence, the quiet between us as comfortable as an old quilt. One evening he asked softly, "Do you regret how things happened with Vanessa?" I considered the question carefully. I regret that it had to happen. I regret that Ethan lost the mother he thought he had. But stopping her from destroying our family? No, that I will never regret. He reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. Then you're stronger than most. A woman who protects what she loves isn't someone to pity. She's someone worth admiring. The warmth that bloomed in my chest surprised me. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt not just alive, but wanted. Robert didn't see me as a burden or a survivor. He saw me as a woman still capable of love, dignity, and choice. By the time spring rolled around, life had found its rhythm again. Daniel's shoulders were less heavy. Ethan laughed louder, ran faster, dreamed bigger. And I found myself smiling at simple things. The smell of fresh coffee, the sound of Robert's knock on the door, the sight of my grandson sprinting across the lawn. We had survived the storm Vanessa brought into our lives. More than survived. We were learning to live again. 2 years passed before I saw her again. It was the afternoon of Ethan's 14th birthday, and I was smoothing frosting across a chocolate cake when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole stood a woman I barely recognized. Vanessa Carter was thinner, her hair shorter and streaked with gray, her once flawless skin marked by years that prison had stolen. She wore a plain blue dress, a small bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes hollow but searching. "Hello, Margaret," she said softly when I opened the door. "May I come in?" "Ethan's not here," I told her, my voice clipped. "He's at practice with Robert." "I know, I came to see you." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She entered cautiously as though afraid the air itself might reject her. She perched on the edge of Harold's old chair, her shoulders hunched, her hands twisting in her lap. "You look well," she offered quietly. "Prison seems to have taught you manners," I replied. She flinched, but didn't defend herself. "I deserve that. I deserve worse." For a long moment, silence stretched between us. Finally, she lifted her gaze, eyes shining with tears. "I want to apologize. Not because my lawyer told me to, not because I expect forgiveness. I want to apologize because I was wrong. I hurt people I should have loved. And I want a second chance, not with Daniel. I know that's gone, not even with Ethan. Though I hope someday he'll let me back into his life. I want a second chance to be a decent human being." Her words caught me off guard. For the first time since I'd known her, I didn't hear performance in her tone. I heard rawness, almost sincerity. "What do you want from me, Vanessa?" I asked. "A job. Margaret Brooks told me you volunteer at the free clinic downtown. They need a receptionist. I want to work there. I want to help instead of hurt." She pulled a folded letter from her bag. This is from my therapist. She says I have narcissistic personality disorder. She told me it's not an excuse, but it explains why I treated people the way I did. I know I can't erase what I've done, but I want to try to be better. I held the letter but didn't read it. My eyes stayed on hers, searching for the old Vanessa hidden behind the mask. But the mask was gone. What remained was a woman broken open by consequence, desperate to build something new. The clinic job pays little, I said evenly. You'll be answering phones, cleaning up after patients, doing thankless work. And if you're late, rude, or dishonest, you'll be gone. I'll make sure you never work in this town again. Her tears spilled freely. I understand, thank you. You don't know what this means. Don't thank me yet, I warned. Prove you deserve it first. And Vanessa, if you ever hurt Ethan again, what I did before will look like kindness compared to what comes next. She nodded, trembling. I believe you. Weeks later, she started at the clinic. To my surprise, she lasted. Months passed, and I heard from Dr. Alvarez that Vanessa was reliable, punctual, even kind with patients who had nothing to give her in return. It didn't erase her sins, but it was something. One afternoon at the grocery store, I saw her restocking shelves on her break. She looked healthier, lighter, the bitterness gone from her face. Hello, Margaret, she said. How are things going? Hard, she admitted, but good. Dart Alvarez says I might train as a medical assistant if I keep this up. There was no arrogance in her tone, only quiet hope. Later that evening, I told Daniel. He listened, arms folded, eyes wary. Do you think she's really different? I think she's trying, I said honestly. Whether it lasts is up to her. Ethan, now taller than me, spoke softly. Does this mean I can see her? Just for coffee or something? Daniel's breath caught, but I nodded. That's your choice, sweetheart. She's still your mother. If you feel ready, you should see for yourself. The meeting was arranged at a small cafe downtown. Vanessa looked nervous, almost fragile, but when Ethan walked in, her face lit with restrained joy. She didn't overwhelm him, didn't plead, didn't excuse herself. She simply asked about his school, his team, his friends. She listened. For the first time in years, she truly listened. When they hugged goodbye, Ethan whispered, Can we do this again sometime? Tears slid down her cheeks. I'd like that very much. That night at dinner, Ethan turned to me. Grandma, thank you. If you hadn't protected us, Dad says we might have lost each other forever. I reached for his hand, my heart full. Family isn't about blood, Ethan. It's about love, respect, and showing up every day. Your mother forgot that once, but she's trying to remember, and we never forgot. Robert smiled from across the table, his hand brushing mine. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying the one who tried to break you. Sometimes it's living well, protecting what you love, and teaching the next generation that even broken people can try again. And so, to those of you listening, remember this. Enemies may try to strip you down, but they often give you the greatest gift of all. They show you exactly how strong you really are. If this story touched you, share it. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and never forget, your voice matters.